And Yuval, I'd like to start with you, if that's all right. You've been working in this space for quite a while as an activist. Tell me, to what extent do you think progressivist movements, non-Muslim movements that I just discussed, are helping radicals in the East, groups like Hamas?
Well, firstly, I should mention that I advise 43 different governmental and non-governmental organizations in the United States, Israel, and Canada. Being on air regularly, representing liberal, progressive, Democrat movements, including my own LGBT movement, grew increasingly challenging as I felt that my own movements were betraying the values that we're supposed to represent. And I was waving the red flag for years, largely ignored by the 10,604 Jewish organizations that exist in the United States, which means there's one Jewish organization for every 780 Jews. In contrast, and we laugh. So first, we can think about that in a critical way. And in true Jewish Yiddishkeit fashion, I'm going to have a few opinions about that. One, amazing. We find a need, we say, oi, let's create an organization for it to help these people. In contrast, these organizations don't often collaborate because they worry about whose name is going to be first on the press release. And we don't want to lose donors from one organization to another instead of just collaborating in joint initiative. In contrast, how many Muslim organizations are there in the United States? 30. That means that when they're trying to mobilize a movement, they're able to do so in a much better way. So what did I see within the progressive spaces? I would regularly refer to myself and refer to my pronouns as, of course, because I was forced to, he, him, his, Jew, Zionist.
Good for you.
I waved that flag. Now, what I started to see within these progressive movements in Hollywood, where I'm engaged in the media industry, and obviously in the socio-political progressive spaces, is I started to see more and more people who were forcing facts to fit their opinions as opposed to using facts to shape their opinions. And that revealed a self-centered narcissism built upon bigotry, which revealed low self-esteem. So when they felt bad about lack of success or trying to forget about the non-binary thought process or lifestyles that we aim to project, started to embrace binary thinking. We've all spoken about it, oppressor versus oppressed. It became a victimhood competition. Who's the biggest victim? And the biggest victim becomes the biggest hero. That's binary thinking. Within my LGBT community, we talk about non-binary fluidity. So why was this happening? And people were trying to align themselves and to represent the biggest victim and take that victimhood upon themselves. So what happened? This has been going on for decades. Islamist movements saw a vacuum. And what happens when a vacuum isn't properly filled by information, it can be filled in very dangerous and detrimental ways. So Islamist movements infiltrated the LGBTQ space, looking at the language of progressive movements, and said, queer rights are Palestinian rights, and Palestinian rights are queer rights. At a conference where Queers for Palestine was trying to cancel me and interrupt my session. Since 2016, this has been going on. And I should be very upfront with all of you in this space. There's an accusation that's been following me actually since 2016, just to be very upfront with all of you. And it started by Queers for Palestine, which then doubled down and now call themselves Queers for Hamas. And we laugh because it's ridiculous. They have been accusing me quite actively of being obviously Zionist and openly Jewish. Just so you know who you're listening to right now. And they would accuse me and try to vilify me based upon my identity. Meanwhile, there were all of these Jews and allies, Christians and conservative people and people who connected to their religion, whether it's Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Baha'i, Druze people, Bedouin people, who'd come up to me and say, Yuval, you're so brave for saying everything that I'm going through, everything that I'm feeling. Thank you so much. I said, don't thank me, join me. Why am I here alone in the front lines? So what ultimately started to happen is I'm no longer a Democrat. I just couldn't be, even though I was advising the LGBTQ council to the DNC. I'm no longer progressive, my values haven't changed. And I found a more safe space within Republican and conservative communities. So ultimately, what's the breakdown? This mind twisting that I aim to untwist, I call it, what the fact? Please use that line. You can attribute it to me or not, I don't care. But we need to fight with facts. We're fighting people who don't have facts, but they know how they feel. How do you combat somebody's emotions? How do you combat somebody whose identity is based upon their beliefs? It's very hard to do. But it's very easy to argue with somebody or communicate with somebody who bases their identity on their values. Values, we can sit down and disagree and have a conversation and all have a seat at the table, which is what the progressive movements are supposed to be about. Tolerance, acceptance, equality, but they have embraced fascist movements which are not about tolerance, which are not about acceptance, and not about equality.
Okay, thank you. Yuval, we've had one question about the teachings of LGBT values in schools. And this has been a hot political topic in places like Michigan, where we have seen groups like CARE, even, despite its progressive leanings, aligning itself for the first time in many years with conservative forces to oppose some of the objectionable, as they see it, language and books in school libraries and so on. Do you think it's possible that activists such as yourself will now find a new threat from conservative Christians and Jews aligning themselves with Islamists, whether with good intention or not, that ultimately harm traditional liberal democratic values?
Absolutely. We're seeing the not much of a difference between the far left extreme and the far right extreme. There's just one difference, really, and that's religion, right? That's the only difference. One of the big dangers as we continue to move forward is that we're seeing the adoption of terminology. The name Alliance for Global Justice. What a beautiful sounding name, even though they've funneled money, terrorist money, and have infiltrated Western communities. Jewish Voices for Peace, by the way, is neither. It's neither Jewish, nor is it for peace. But they have a great name. And they're using the terminology of the left progressive movements to manipulate the feeble minds and are funding through grants and through events and sometimes a simple little pizza party where they're able to utilize these terms and compare Islamophobia to homophobia. And they're just able to manipulate the feeble minds, which eventually will be eradicated. The problem within the far left progressives is that they can easily be manipulated to move from that extreme to an Islamist extreme. And we're also already seeing a vast rise in people from those communities converting to Islam. And that's a very frightening thing where they're not just converting to Islam, they're converting to Islamism. Big difference.